You're crouching at the edge of a fire. The air smells like wet soil and burning pine resin. Outside the shelter, rain is hammering the ground. The woman in the corner has just given birth, and something has gone wrong. Not wrong in the way you feared. She's alive. The baby is alive. But there's another one. A second baby, identical in every alarming way to the first, now making the exact same noise. The midwife, if you can call her that, has stopped moving. The older women in the group are exchanging glances you don't have the vocabulary to interpret. Is this a gift? Is this a warning? Is this one person split in two or two people sharing one soul? You have no framework for this. Nobody in your group does. This has never happened before. Not here. Not to anyone you know. The obvious assumption is that ancient humans probably loved twins. 2 babies for the price of 1 labor. Double the contribution to the group's survival. From a purely evolutionary standpoint, more offspring equals more success, right? Except that's not remotely what the archaeological and ethnographic record shows. Across dozens of ancient cultures, twins weren't celebrated. They were treated as a crisis event that required an immediate decision. And the logic behind that decision is stranger, darker, and more psychologically revealing than anything you'd expect. Here's what nobody tells you. The reaction to twins in ancient human societies wasn't random superstition. It followed a remarkably consistent psychological pattern across cultures that had no contact with each other. The same fears, the same rituals, the same impossible choices, repeated independently on every continent. And the evidence for this is genuinely unsettling. The earliest direct evidence we have comes from burial sites. At the Upper Paleolithic site of Krems-Wachtberg in Austria, archaeologists discovered something extraordinary in 2005. The grave of 2 newborn infants buried together approximately 27,000 years ago, carefully arranged and covered with red ochre, a pigment associated across prehistoric cultures with ritual significance. The excavation, led by researchers from the Austrian Academy of Sciences, revealed that both infants had been placed in the grave with deliberate ceremony. They weren't discarded. They weren't separated. They were treated as a single burial event. What makes this find remarkable isn't just the age, it's the precision of the intention. Somebody decided these 2 lives belonged together, even in death. Not just as a practical matter, but as a cosmological statement. The ochre coating alone would have required significant preparation. This wasn't a rushed burial. Someone spent time on this. But here's the complicating detail. Ceremonial burial doesn't tell us whether the infants were honored or whether they were sacrificed. In many cultures, elaborate burial rites were reserved specifically for deaths that were considered dangerous to the community, deaths that required ritual containment. The ochre might mean beloved, or it might mean neutralized. Ethnographic data from more recent hunter-gatherer populations fills in some of the gap. Anthropologist René Pennington's comparative research on African forager societies documented that in the majority of groups studied, the birth of twins triggered a formal community response, not a spontaneous one. This wasn't panic. It was protocol. So what exactly were ancient humans afraid of? The conventional story, when this topic is discussed at all, is that ancient humans feared twins because of superstition. Primitive people, limited worldview, magical thinking. One soul accidentally split into 2 bodies, therefore dangerous. That's the tidy explanation. Except it doesn't account for the sheer geographic consistency of the response, or for the fact that many of these cultures had highly sophisticated ecological and social reasoning in every other domain of their lives. The more compelling explanation, developed by researchers including biological anthropologist Myhiri Gibson at the University of Bristol, centers not on superstition but on resource logic. In nomadic forager societies, women carried infants for the first 2 to 4 years of life, literally carried them, while also contributing to food gathering and camp movement. Twins created an immediate physical impossibility. You cannot carry 2 infants across a landscape while also doing everything else survival requires. Not without a support network that many small bands simply didn't have. Here's the wryly uncomfortable observation. The magical thinking explanation for twin infanticide might itself be a form of magical thinking, a way for modern observers to avoid confronting the rational, brutal arithmetic that hunter-gatherer life sometimes forced on people. What emerged, across cultures, was a fascinating psychological solution. Turn the impossible material choice into a metaphysical one. If twins represented a spiritual disruption, an omen, a doubled soul, a violation of the natural order, then the decision became cosmic rather than personal. The community wasn't choosing which infant to let die. They were restoring balance to something larger than themselves. And that reframe changes everything about how we understand ancient moral reasoning. Because what it suggests is that the mythology wasn't the cause of the decision. The mythology was the coping mechanism. The biological reality of twinning in ancient populations is worth sitting with for a moment. Dizygotic twins, fraternal twins from two separate eggs, occur at rates that vary significantly by population and by maternal age. The Yoruba people of Nigeria have one of the highest natural twin rates in the world, estimated at roughly 45 to 50 twins per 1,000 births. In contrast, many East Asian populations historically had rates closer to 6 or 7 per 1,000. This variation matters. Anthropologist Helen Ball at Durham University has documented that societies with higher twin birth rates show more elaborate twin-specific cultural frameworks, rituals, naming systems, and mythologies built specifically around twins. Not because high twin rates made twins safer, but because higher frequency forced cultural adaptation. When something happens often enough, you develop a system for it. The brain science layer is equally striking. Developmental psychologist Philippe Rochat at Emory University has studied how humans process the concept of identical other, another being that mirrors you exactly. His research found that even modern adults experience measurable cognitive dissonance when confronted with identical twins, a disruption in the social recognition system the brain uses to track individuals. We are wired, at a very deep level, to expect people to be singular. Twins violate that expectation at a neurological level, not just a cultural one. Let that sink in. Your brain, in 2024, still hasn't fully caught up to twins. Imagine processing that disruption with no prior framework, no word for it, and the fate of your group potentially hanging on the decision you make in the next few hours. The cross-cultural pattern is the thing that should stop you mid-scroll. Take 3 examples with no historical contact between them. Among the Kaguru of Tanzania, twins were considered to carry spiritual power so volatile that the family required ritual purification before reintegrating with the community. The power was real. It was just directionally uncertain. Among certain groups in pre-colonial West Africa, twins were venerated as sacred intermediaries between the living and the spirit world. The Yoruba Ibeji tradition produced elaborate twin figurines used in ancestor worship. And among some Aboriginal Australian groups, ethnographic accounts from the early 20th century documented that twin births were treated as signs of adultery because the logic was, one father, one child. 2 children meant 2 fathers, 3 different frameworks, 3 different continents. The same core anxiety. Twins break the rules of how individual identity works. The same ochre-covered infants from Krems-Wachtberg were participating in a conversation that was still happening, in different languages, 25,000 years later. Here's the uncomfortable question this all leads to. When ancient humans constructed mythologies around twins being dangerous or sacred or cosmically significant, were they wrong? Not in the factual sense. Obviously, twins don't carry supernatural power. But in the functional sense, the mythology solved a real problem by converting an impossible material decision into a cultural one. The community could act without any individual being personally responsible. The shaman decided. The spirits decided. The cosmos decided. Modern societies have largely eliminated twin-specific mortality through neonatal medicine and the end of nomadic subsistence life. But we haven't eliminated the psychological machinery that ancient humans used to offload unbearable decisions onto larger frameworks. We just pointed at different things now. When a culture tells you that something devastating was meant to happen, or part of a plan, you are running 27,000-year-old software. It's the same code, just a different input. The dark version of that observation is this. The same cognitive tool that allowed ancient humans to cope with impossible choices is the same tool that, poorly aimed, allows modern humans to accept preventable suffering as cosmically inevitable. The honest answer is we don't fully know how any specific ancient group experienced twin birth, and we probably never will. The archaeological record gives us positions and pigments, but not the 3 hours of conversation that happened before the decision was made. What we do know is this: every culture that confronted twins confronted the same philosophical rupture. What makes a person singular? What makes an identity individual? These aren't questions we invented in philosophy seminars. They're questions your ancestors were asking in the rain 30,000 years ago, staring at two identical faces. Next time you see twins and feel that faint, almost imperceptible double take, that tiny cognitive stutter, you're not being weird. You're being ancient, and somewhere under an Austrian field, covered in red ochre, two infants have been making exactly that point for 27,000 years.